Objectives for the workshop, the outcomes we want you to achieve is that when you leave here, you will have enhanced your understanding of writing expectations at the graduate level, that you will be able to identify your current writing strategies and be aware of resources available for expanding those, that you'll gain an understanding of professional written communication in the academy, and that you'll be able to identify university resources and strategies that will help you in your writing efforts. So, why does academic writing matter? Why does professional writing at the university matter? Well, here's a few reasons we're doing this program. One is that one of the biggest concerns expressed by graduate students, especially new graduate students, and maybe even especially those who are returning to university after being out in the workforce for a while, is that they're concerned that they won't be up to the writing required because they lack confidence, they lack time, their parents, they're working, they have older parents they're caring for, or their TAs or RAs. Life is really busy, and so they're concerned about having the time it takes. And they also express concern about not having sufficient skill in utilizing scholarly resources that are available to them. Another reason we talk about this is because the ability to write professionally is a critical skill in business and industry, not just in academia. Some of you who have been out in the workforce for a while already know that and have already developed perhaps some pretty strong professional writing skills, and that will be helpful to you in academia. When CEOs and leaders of major corporations and businesses talk about what they look for in employees, one of the major things they mention is the ability to write well, because the way we write professionally and put ideas either out to the rest of the company or to our teammates that we're working with can really facilitate progress, or it can get in the way of it. It's sometimes thought of as just a box to check off. All right, I did this assignment, check, it's done. I did this thesis, okay, it's done. Or this dissertation, okay, it's done. It's true that those writing assignments are assignments. They're things that we have to do in order to finish our graduate work. But writing is more than that. Writing assignments help us learn to think critically, and help us learn how to put our ideas out in the public sphere, maybe, or out in the public classroom in a way that's logical and consistent and clear. It helps us develop a form of communication that we really need to have, whether we're in the academy or outside of it. Another reason is, quite frankly, professors who are teaching when we teach graduate courses, often have different and higher expectations of our students' writing than we do when we teach an undergraduate class. So I want to talk a minute in a broad way about graduate versus undergraduate writing. There aren't any official rules that you can find. This is undergraduate writing and that is graduate writing. But there really should be a difference between the two. There is a difference between the two. One difference is simply the purpose of the writing. In graduate school, we really should be writing for more than just the purpose of fulfilling an assignment. We're really looking for broader relevance for what we write. Um, we may have a different intended audience. In graduate programs, we often expect to see a lot of summarizing and synthesizing of information. There's less reliance on direct quotes, for example. We may be doing a paper about a research paper, literature review about topic A, and we look at all these resources about topic A, but then we don't quote author one and author two and author three. Instead, we summarize that information and integrate the information, showing similarities and differences in whatever the scholarly conversation about that topic is. Another thing that can be different is that formatting and vocabulary are specific to the field. The vocabulary that's common in my field in counseling or marriage and family therapy is common to other counselors, common to other marriage and family counselors. We all know what we're talking about when we use certain words. Those words wouldn't mean the same necessarily to somebody in a completely different field. The same thing is true for physics, for chemistry. We have a particular professional language, if you will, which is a good thing and sometimes a not so good thing. But nonetheless, they're there. Another thing that's really important to remember in graduate writing is that you really need to follow the conventions of your own discipline. There's not one big writing guide that fits us all. So you look at common journals in your field, you ask your your faculty advisors, and you ask perhaps instructors what they recommend. Yeah, definitely instructors. If they have formats they recommend, if it's not absolutely already clear in your discipline. In College of Education and the parts of liberal arts such as psychology, the College of Nursing, we all use American Psychological Association's style guide, the APA guide. But that's not true for everybody. MLA is another style guide for a different group of authors. Some of the sciences may have different guides from that altogether, and they may not be compiled in the same way. Also remember that the writing task in graduate school, just like they became more complex as you went from being a freshman to graduating as a senior in your undergraduate work, the writing tasks get more complex as you move deeper into your graduate program. The good news is you should also be learning the skills you need to complete those more complex tasks of writing as you move through your program. Graduate program. Relationships are different because classes are often smaller, because you're being mentored into the profession. You may have more one-to-one time with your faculty member or with your primary academic mentor, or you may have more small group interactions with a very few students and smaller even than your class size and a faculty member. With that said, you also need to know that what you can expect from your graduate faculty may be different than what you're accustomed to with your undergraduate faculty, even though you may, if you, for instance, got your bachelor's degree at this university, you may have some of the same faculty members if you have a major that had a major in your undergraduate work. You may find, for example, that you have less detail and that you have fewer step-by-step instructions in your graduate classes. You may find a difference in the amount of feedback you get on assignments. Could be more, it could be less. You'll more often find that faculty members expect you to correct your own work instead of us correcting it for you. And I do say us because I also teach. The other thing to remember is that faculty members are all different, even within the same program or department. And so the way that we structure feedback, the way that we establish expectations are different. I teach in a graduate program, for instance, and this is just a small example. Our students have to be very familiar with rules and regulations about licensure. I don't post those for students. I don't even post a link for students to find that. I have them go find it. Other faculty members do that differently. They may post the link to the rules and the regulations. There's a reason I do it that way, and there's a reason other faculty members do it the way they do it. Neither is wrong, but our purposes are different. So I'm going to come back to the title of this slide in a minute, but I do want to mention these few things. A reasonable command of grammar and mechanics is just expected in graduate school. It's not something that we spend time teaching unless you're in a field that really focuses on that. It's just considered to be a fundamental baseline for most disciplines. It's not the essence of academic writing, but it can have an impact on how your work is viewed. Grammar and mechanics of writing matter in both academic and professional writing. Grammar is about how we put words together, how we make sentences, how we form paragraphs. It's the fundamental structure of language. Mechanics can, and you'll find different teachers talking about this differently. And bear in mind that I'm not, and I have never been a writing teacher. But mechanics generally talk about punctuation, capitalization, spelling, formatting, those kind of things that are not so much about the ideas presented. Adequate grammar and adequate mechanics promote clarity in your writing. And that really matters in academic writing and in professional writing. If you look at the title of this slide, it's eats, comma, shoots, comma, and leaves. And that's actually the title of a book that was written in 2003 by a woman whose last name is Truss. And it's about punctuation. And I like that book because the title entertained me and it's written in a funny kind of way. If you compare that with the example in the bottom, eats, shoots, and leaves with no punctuation, you can clearly see that those things mean two different things. When I read what's under the example at the bottom, eats, shoots, and leaves, I immediately think about a panda. When I read that top thing, I'm not so sure what I'm thinking. Maybe somebody has a meal, then shoots a game of pool or shoots a gun, and then they get up and leave. But it's not about a panda. So that kind of clarity about can be had with adequate grammar, adequate punctuation, that sort of thing. Now I want to talk a little bit, and if you're getting more anxious instead of less, It's going to get better. We'll get there. I want to talk a minute about writing strategies because getting better at writing and your productivity with writing not only has to do with kind of a command of your subject matter or a learning of your subject matter, and certainly isn't all about grammar and punctuation, but it does have something to do with knowing yourself, knowing what strategies work for you. It has to do with how you write. And to get better and better at understanding how you write, you have to think about it. And you have to think about ways to expand how you write or improve on strategies you use. What's your main strategy for writing? For example, for me, I read a lot first about whatever it is. And I read journals and I read book chapters and I go online and read various blogs and I read a lot about whatever I'm going to be writing or presenting on. And that kind of has to settle in my head. And as it's settling, I usually have a pad somewhere where I scribble down random thoughts that go through my mind because that's the way my brain works. So I do a certain amount of that before I ever start writing. And then I start writing and expanding some of those words and concepts that I wrote and put the thing together, whatever it is, from first to last. And then I have to reorder it. That's the way it works for me. I have never been a person who could write an outline and then write the paper to fit the outline. It didn't work for me in high school when I was taught how to write that way. It doesn't work for me now. Now, understand that in your graduate career, there are going to be some things you write where the outline is pretty plain because it's set up according to a journal article or sections in a thesis or in a dissertation. Other thing, and some of you may work really well with outlines, at least general outlines. Another thing that you need to know about yourself is, does your writing strategy change according to what you're writing? If you write a blog, for instance, do you have a way that you write that's different than if you're writing an essay to turn in? What's different about it? What other strategies have you used besides your primary strategies for writing? I have tried to write with background music on, and I know a lot of people who do it, and there's some good evidence that certain kinds of music in the background can be really helpful. It doesn't work for me. It's distracting, and I will inevitably get caught by the music, no matter what the music is, and spend half my time with my attention on the music. I work better with writing if I have quiet, or at least sound that I can tune out. And I don't tune out music very well. So that's something that didn't work for me. Another thing to know so that you can reduce your anxiety and just be more accepting of yourself is understand that there's not a single strategy that will work all the time for every kind of project. And that's okay. It's not only okay, it's normal. And so we have to experiment around according to what we're trying to write. And we can get feedback um, from other people. We can find out what they do to write, what works for them. And you know what? The Writing Center has a whole bunch of information about writing strategies that you can try. I'll give you some more information about that in a little while. So, academic writing means understanding that basics like grammar and mechanics are important. You're, and understanding that The purpose for which you write is different. It is also beginning to learn more about your own writing strategies and what works for you. So now we come to specific tips. I just looked at my clock on my other computer and realized I need to move along. So when you're working on assignments, read the syllabus instructions for any writing assignment. I know that sounds obvious, but you might be surprised how often students don't do that or don't read the instructions well. Read the instructions. And if there are rubrics provided, charts, or any kind of information that tells you what the instructor is looking for and how they'll be grading, look at those too. And then once you've read the syllabus and looked at the rubrics, if there are any, ask your instructor for clarification. Most of us want to help clarify for you. We want to answer questions. And we also know that our instructions are not always crystal clear. So when a student asks me, it gives me the opportunity to give them information they need to do the kind of job they want to do on the assignment, rather than turning in something that they could have fixed from the beginning if just understood. Use whatever style guide or specific conventions within your discipline that are required, unless you're directed to do otherwise. In my field, in counseling and in psychology, and in education and largely in nursing, we use the American Psychological Association Style Guide, APA. And we're currently in the 7th edition. And so it's common for faculty in my department to have on their syllabus to write using APA conventions. Does that mean everything follows the APA style guide? Not necessarily. It depends on the assignment. If someone's writing an essay, for example, there may not be headings and there may not be um, subheadings and that sort of thing, but I may want to see the title page that uses APA conventions. I may want to see the running head at the top. I may want to see the page number at the top, which is where APA says it goes. If you use MLA, it is different. So, and the sciences have their own ways of their own formats for writing. So know what's required in your discipline, and be clear about the kind of paper you're writing. Is it a literature or research paper? You're probably really going to need to use your style guide pretty thoroughly. If it's a reflective paper where you're sharing your own reactions to something, there may be much less of that. And more tips. If you want to reduce your anxiety about writing, one of the ways to do that is to do more of it. When is interesting. Finding time to do it can be difficult, but setting aside a time on your calendar when you will write, even if it's not directly about an assignment, can help you get over some of your stuck places, help you identify what your stuck places are, help you identify what distracts you, so that those writing strategies we talked about a minute ago can get more clear for you. And maybe your writing time would be spent on what you would like to see in a blog. Maybe you write a short story. Maybe you write almost a diary type entry. Doesn't really matter so much what it is. Or maybe you know you have a research paper due at the end of the semester and you're writing little sections of that. Schedule it, because if you don't, writing has a way of slipping off to the side until it's right on top of you. Actively seek feedback about your writing. You can do that with your peers in your program. You can do it with readers outside your field. One of the things that can be really helpful in terms of making your writing clear is asking somebody to read what you've written and see if they can follow it. Now, I know that there are discipline specific things that you wouldn't want to necessarily ask somebody to read. There would, if somebody's writing about programming, there would be things that I would miss in terms of not being clear and logical and in a flow because I have so little content knowledge about that. If it was a paper written for English, I could follow that much more easily. But have somebody outside your discipline read it. Don't hesitate to use the Writing Center. I'm going to mention that more than once. And you can also talk with your faculty advisor or your instructor. Another thing to think about is try to finish early enough to proofread and edit more than once. It's remarkable how many errors you can find, or how many, and maybe not outright errors, maybe just finding a better way to say something. When you are able to go back a week later after you've had a little space away from whatever it is that you wrote, it's amazing how many little tweaks you may find you can make. Um, I tend to, I always was a last minute writer. It worked for me when I was in high school. It worked for me in college, at least at the undergraduate and even to some degree at the master's level. But even at the master's level, not nearly so well because I needed to synthesize so much information. Another tip, remember that revision is a good thing. So when you get feedback from somebody and you've got track changes all over it or written comments all over it, use that to your advantage, learn from it, and read. Read a lot. Read in your field, read fiction, read the newspaper, read. And that's part of how we learn to write well is just by having a sense of what it looks like and on a page and how it flows on a page. I'm going to get a little more specific here. Structure your paper so that the flow is organized and clear. Sometimes we think that academic writing should use a whole lot of words, big words at that, and have a whole lot of parts to every sentence. The opposite is often true. We want the paper to be clear and organized. Generally, when you write a paper, you're going to either start from a very broad frame and narrow it down to more specific and detailed information, or you're going to do the opposite. You'll start from a small, fairly detailed frame and then broaden it out. What's not clear to read is when a paper goes back and forth between those two things. So figuring out which structure is better for whatever it is you're doing, and then sticking to that will be helpful. And connect ideas throughout your paper. One of the things I see in student papers a lot is that, or fairly pretty often, is that people will have a paragraph here, and then a paragraph here, and then a paragraph here, but they don't draw any connection between and among the paragraphs. And so it's almost as if someone read this study and summarized it, and then read another study and then summarized it, and then read this article and then summarized it, but there's not any connection. So one of the things we look for is that people are making those connections. And sometimes you need to define terms. Not always. If you're writing in your discipline, terms within your discipline that are commonly used, you don't need to define. Always, always provide sources for your information and avoid casual language. I like casual language a lot. I like to listen to it. I like to use it. It I always wonder about where phrases came from, but they don't belong in my academic writing. And those phrases or cliches or things I heard my mother or my grandmother say don't belong there. And one more time, follow the instructions because yes, faculty notice. We know what things we've asked people to cover and we notice if it's not covered. I've mentioned clarity 2 or 3 times, and I want to go back to that. Um, Writing clearly takes effort. It seems like it ought to be simple, but it's not. And so here are some ways to do that, and these ways may not always be appropriate in your paper. Whatever the goal of your paper is, purpose, tell us and tell us fairly early in the paper. I don't want to read through 4 pages before I figure out what my student is trying to talk about. So if they tell me early on, maybe in the first paragraph even, it helps. Sometimes concrete examples can really help make your meaning clear. And like I said, avoid wordiness. Wordiness is something I'm guilty of. And I can take, 20 words to say something that can easily be said in 10 or 12. I do it when I talk. I do it when I write emails. I do it when I write book chapters. And then I have to really scale back. It takes practice to do that. Add structure with headings and subheadings and consistent constructions. So if you tell me you're going to talk about red, blue, and yellow, on the slide it says blue, red, and yellow. You tell me you're going to talk about blue, red, and yellow, then do it and do it in that order. Or else you can lose your reader. And then a person is left scrolling back and forth on the screen to previous pages or flipping pages trying to pick up the thread of what you're talking about. And use transitional phrases, things like however, or in some, or in contrast to. But here's the thing, use them correctly. Sometimes people write however when the next idea they're presenting isn't a however at all. It's another piece of information that's not connected. Keep your sentence construction simple, 1 or 2 ideas. And have someone, this is basically the same idea I presented a minute ago, but said a little differently. Have somebody else read your paper who's not been involved in the work you've been in. One of the things that happens to probably all of us as writers is that when we're real involved in a project, we get to know it really well and it makes sense to us. And we can have difficulty seeing how it might not make sense to somebody else who's coming to that fresh. And so having somebody else read the work and say, yeah, or I don't quite understand what you're talking about can help you clarify your work a lot. We're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about professional communication in grad school. And I'm going to focus the most on email because that's how students most often communicate with me in writing, besides through the work they turn in. Some of you have been in the workforce and had to communicate a lot by email, and some of this may be really common knowledge to you. But I think it's important to pay attention to it anyway. In general, at least until you know the faculty members you're talking to, you probably want to not email them using text kind of language, for example, or emojis, or various other kinds of social media conversation. Those text messages, for example, are intended to be brief and informal. That's how they are. That's one of the standards. And it's fine. It's a legitimate form of communication, but it's not generally the form of communication that we use in email. For professors, for most of us, I think, emails are more akin to writing a letter, maybe a short letter, but a letter. A little more formal, a little more thorough, certainly more clear. I don't want to try to figure out what that particular collection of emojis mean or that sort of thing. More adherence to grammar and the mechanics of writing. Like I said, both are valid ways of communicating. And you'll do well to be able to communicate in a social media environment as well as in more formal environments. But you need to know which fits who you're writing to and which fits what you're writing and why you're writing. At the university, generally, a letter style email is better. And a relational touch is always appropriate. We're not robots, we're automatons. We are all human here, and we want to acknowledge that. So you don't have to, it's not, you don't have to approach it as if you are writing the CEO of your company who is holding your job in their hands. Do use your Islander email account and write to your professor's university account. One of the things you may not know about that is that's the way we are directed to communicate with students. It has to do with security. It has to do with issues that could get involved with FERPA and things like that. And do use email if you're wanting some clarification or you're wanting a meeting or a letter of recommendation. Do use email for agreed upon topics. For example, I direct and consult on dissertations or on professional presentations. And so students I'm working with will email me about those projects. Absolutely appropriate. They don't have to set up a meeting. They maybe have a quick question or two, and that's absolutely okay. Students email me with questions about class, and that's absolutely okay. It is important to have a clear and accurate subject line. Remember that your Islander email is your first initial and your last name, maybe with a number after it. And so if we don't have an established relationship with you, if we don't have an accurate subject line, and if you're writing about a class, you don't tell us the class, and you don't tell us your whole name, we may not know who you are. We will soon. But an ideal email would be, good morning, Dr. Oliver. Hi, Dr. Oliver. Some kind of salutation. And I'm writing because, tell me the reason and explain it. Don't use text speak. Don't use slang. If you don't get a response, you can follow up. But keep in mind that you need to give the faculty member at least 24 hours, not counting the weekend and holidays. Please don't email your professor and ask them what course you are taking with them. It happens. I know it may seem strange, but it doesn't. It does happen. Hey, Dr. Oliver, what class do I have with you? Well, look at your schedule. That's really your job. And I may not know off the top of my head if I'm teaching more than one class. Try to avoid asking for information that is clearly in the syllabus. Asking for clarification is one thing. Asking for what's clearly there is another thing. Try not to write an email to your faculty when you're really angry. It's not that you can't get angry at faculty. It doesn't mean that you can't think a faculty member made a mistake, but it's a good idea for all of us not to write when we're angry. We should calm down a little bit and think through what we want to say. Probably don't have to say this, but it's not wise to threaten your professor. It's not going to get you where you want to go. And remember that if it's something long and complicated, it may be better to just make an appointment. There are other ways we communicate in graduate school. You may actually write a memo and send it to your professor. You may write a letter and send it as an attachment to your professor. We also have communication venues in our Blackboard formats, and the tone and content in those is going to depend on what you're doing and why you're doing it. For instance, the communication amongst students, as long as it's civil discourse, the communication amongst students working on a class project together might be really different in tone than a communication that's directed towards me. I say all this because we're talking about a starting point. So for me to get an email from a student I haven't met and that starts off with, "Hey, Dr. O," oh, I'm not sure what that's about. And it's a little bit of an overstepping of a boundary, not because I'm a faculty member, but because I don't know you. And so that's a way of addressing a faculty member that may be a little startling. Or you may have a faculty member who writes, "Hey, back at you. Who are you?" It's better to know your faculty member a little better than that before you do that. I'm not formal in my emails with my students that I work with a lot. And that's okay with me. And it's okay that they're not formal with me. But know the faculty member as you make those decisions. And also know that when you are communicating about a formal matter, a formal tone is better. So while I may share information back and do share information back and forth with other faculty members or have discussions via email, if we're talking about something that is a formal matter, then my tone is going to be different. Here's what I want you to see. We have a writing center on campus, and it's within CASA. They have an amazing amount of material and resources that are available to you. Some of it is available online and via various handouts they have on a lot of topics. They're available there and online, like I said. They can be really quick references. You also can make appointments with individuals in the writing center. Here's another thing. If you make an appointment, if you can go with an idea in mind about what you're asking for, it will be really helpful to whoever you're working with. If you go because you want them to help you with um, transition between paragraphs or between sections, then that's where they'll put their attention. These people are folks who teach writing or who tutor writing all the time, and they're really good at that. There are, if you are not real skilled with things like subject verb agreement, or you tend to miss those things, um, and you tell them you want help with it, and you want, um, and you give them your work, then they will help you with that. They don't do the work for you. They won't edit your paper for you. That's not what they're there for, but they will help you do what you need to do. This ends the formal presentation part, and I want to give an opportunity for people to ask questions if they would like. So I'm going to quit sharing this screen.
If anyone has questions for Dr. Oliver, you can leave it in the Q&A section, and I'll monitor and make sure she knows the questions that you have. While I wait to see if y'all have any questions, there are just a couple things I want to say before the session ends. First, there will be an eval that is emailed to you. So please, if you could take 3 minutes to fill out the eval for us, that would be really great. We appreciate your feedback. And again, we want to make sure that these workshops are accessible to you and have really good information for you. This presentation has been recorded and will be uploaded to our GROW website along with the presentation itself. So you'll be able to go over that. And then from this, we'll have social media winners. So if you attended, you'll be in a drawing to win some cool Islander stuff. So stay tuned and we'll announce those on social media and you'll be emailed about that as well. And then the last thing, we have 2 workshops coming up in September, Surviving Grad School and Framing Research Questions. And those are already up and you can RSVP for those. Okay. It looks like we have a couple questions here, Dr. Oliver. The first one is.
I can see them actually.
Okay, great.
So one of the questions is, what is the link to the Writing Center? Actually, the title of that slide is a link, it's a live link. And so once the presentation gets posted, you will be able to click there. You can also go to just the university website and in the search bar, type Writing Center. And you will come up, you will get a list of things, one of things that include the Writing Center. And actually, that's where I pulled it up today when I was looking at it again. But it is in the title of that last slide. The link is the title. If English is not your native language, and actually I've worked with a lot of my own students have not had English as their native language. One of the things that I've done with my students is when they write, I may have individual conversations with them because the way something is expressed in English is so different than it is expressed in whatever their native language is. And so if it's something like an exam response, or if it's something like their thesis or their dissertation, if all I have is the written material, I may not understand what the idea they're trying to put across. So one thing that helps is conversation with your faculty member. Another thing that helps is getting assistance through the Writing Center, and they do have some services for non-native speakers. Um, and I think probably all of your faculty know that English is a really interesting language. Let me put it that way, in terms of how we use words and how the way it's put together. And find an editor and work with them, and work with other students. Also know that most of us who teach students who are working not in their native language have great respect for and admiration for um, your ability to do graduate work in a language that is not native to you. So we do understand and respect that there are areas where you're doing double duty. Someone asked a question about reconnecting with an old professor for advice. Um, that happens a lot with former students, and we tend to really like hearing from former students because otherwise people are just gone, and unless we go to conferences or we see them, because they're just gone. So I prefer emails. I'm going to see those more quickly. Um, and even if what we do in the email is set up a time to actually talk by voice, I prefer emails. That helps a lot. Would the Writing Center be a good sounding board for a paper? Yes, I think that is always a good idea, and they will make recommendations to you um, about ways to think about your paper. They can help you um, think through topics or the focus of a paper. Another place that's a really good um, that has really good resources for that is the librarian in your discipline. There's a librarian assigned to each college, and they can help you think through some of that as well. Thank you, Sophia, for posting that link to the Writing Center. Um, somebody asked a questions about writing strategies. You already have a strategy somewhere. I mean, you've written before you got here. So think about how did you do it? What did you do when you were writing? Did you go sit at a desk somewhere? Did you um, write in little bits? Did you always just wait and write a night or two before? Um, how did you get papers done or things like that? What did you do? Um, and yes, then think about whether that was effective for you. Um, and if there are times that it's been effective and times that it's not. Um, and yes, I think reading about writing strategies, oddly enough, and there is information in the Writing Center, as I recall, just about that. I also found a ton of stuff about writing strategies online, although a lot of those are um, things that require a subscription or something. Not all of them are, but the University Writing Center has information about that too. And yeah, you can brainstorm with somebody from the Writing Center, with other people about what they do when they have a big writing center, writing assignment. How do they pull that off? And then yeah, you try some of that. Um, even things like knowing the time of day when you write best can make a difference. Do you need a nice, neat space? to write effectively, make it so. Just don't get so involved in that nice, neat space that you end up spending half a day cleaning because now you're off into cleaning instead of writing. But what do you need to have there um, in order to make the task of writing easier for you or help it flow better? Um, there's automatic APA formatting. I don't know of a specific software for automatic APA formatting, although there are ways to set that up in your um, Microsoft Word. There are also programs that will format citations for you in APA format. Um, I'll try to find more information about that and post it. Well, actually, I'll check Sophia to post it in Grow if she's willing to do that.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I see. I'm not sure how to pronounce. Lucia Cruz responded. Microsoft Word under reference. Leisha, thank you. Other questions?
Dr. Oliver, it looks like there's one down here that says, is there a website that's your go-to for executive summaries, recommendations, or other professional writing structure information?
I'm sorry, would you read that again?
Yeah, of course. This Brooke is asking, is there a website that is your go-to for executive summaries, recommendation, or other professional writing structure information?
No, not really. There are go-to sites I use for uh, word usage sometimes, or sometimes I start reading something so often I start reading a usage so often that I start questioning myself. And so I'll go to the Grammar Girl's Quick and Dirty Guide, for example, to find little quick things about that when I start seeing things that are different too often. Um, and of course, I always enjoy it. It's my traditional way of doing it. It's the right way. And then I'm, when I find out that, well, it used to be the right way, but now there are a multiplicity of ways to do it. But I don't have a go-to place for strategies or for summaries. Um, what I do, there are some good writing guides on the market. We have, and it's a good idea to check in your department or your college or in your discipline about recommended writing guides that would be helpful to you. Um, and I don't mean the style guides now. I mean things about how you write a research paper or how you write a thesis or a dissertation. Um, those exist, but they vary very often from discipline to discipline. So it's a good idea to check in your department or your program. Ask your academic advisor. They tend to have favorites. Resources online or on campus for research. Do you mean like broad topics, or do you mean grants, or do you mean, can you tell me what you mean? Oh, okay. Yeah, there are resources. And the librarians here are amazing. They are truly amazing. And if you ask a librarian in your discipline, they will help you because there are ways of doing searches of the journals where even whether there's a space or not can change the responses you get. Um, and they tend to know essential keywords for your discipline. Um, they're extremely helpful. There have been instances where I have gone to the College of Ed, because that's my academic college librarian, because I just wasn't finding what I was looking for anywhere. And I do that. I mean, that's part of my job is to do some research. And so, but I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for. And actually had to go outside my discipline to find anything relevant. But the librarian is the one who helped me get on the path to where I needed to be. It's what they do is information. That's what they've studied and what they do. And they're really happy to help. Does that address that? Oh, okay, good.
Dr. Oliver, it looks like those are all the questions that we've had submitted. So we want to thank you so much for hosting this. This is a great workshop and a great way to kick off our workshop schedule for the fall. And like I said, everybody, Dr. Oliver's presentation will be up on the GROW website, so you'll be able to access this along with the recording. So if you want to go back and check out anything that she talked about or any of the questions that were reviewed tonight.
Thank you all for coming. I wish we could all be in a big room and I could see you. But I enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, and have a safe night and a great rest of your week. Thank you so much, Dr. Oliver.
Thank you. Bye.